Tui is an author, photographer, musician, and speaker who specializes in quirky, haunted, and downright bizarre destinations. As she puts it, I used to write fiction, but then I moved to Texas. Whoop, whoop. Snyder's award-winning books inspired by the Lone Star State include Paranormal Texas, The Lynching of Santa Claus, Bank Robber, and Unexpected Texas. Tui's writing and photographs have been featured by a variety of publications, including Coast to Coast AM, Fox Travel News, Lifehack, the City of Plano, and more. She was recently chosen by Tarleton State University to be the 2016 Writer and Photographer in Residence for the Langdon Review. Tui has several new books in progress and co-hosts a weekly radio show called Para Mysteries. She enjoys connecting with writers and readers all over the globe through social media and her website, tuisnyder.com. If you guys would please give a warm welcome to Tui Snyder.
All right, thank you. Just to test this out for a second, have to get the clicker. Before I get going, I wanted to thank the folks who organized the Aurora Alien Encounter. They did a lot of hard work. They've done a great job, and this has just been so much fun. I would also like to give a shout out to a few people who I know are listening on the live video stream. And I think that was so clever of the organizers to make that an option, because not everyone's lucky enough to be here in Texas today. And I have a couple people, I actually gave the streaming link out to my those who subscribe to my author newsletter, because Daniel said I could share it with my friends, so I thought, why not? And I know that I've got a few listeners or viewers. Actually, I have two in London, so hi Naomi and hi Owen. There's Big O in Florida. I've got Cassandra and Lee up in Canada. Gus down in Australia. I don't even know what day it is right now in Australia, but he's whatever, I commend him. And I know we've got Tracy, Wolfmutt, and Bad Kitty watching in Seattle area. So thanks all to them. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about the public reaction to the Great Airship Mystery. And specifically, I'm focused on the Texas side of it. So those months when those sightings were most rampant in Texas. So in the spring of 1897, there were hundreds of airship sightings. Hundreds in Texas. And I really wondered, what were people thinking about all these sightings at the time? What was the word on the street, so to speak, in 1897? So I dove into the newspapers of 1897, and I just read them, and I even read articles that weren't related. I looked for editorials. I found some things in police blotters, just references to this strange event. For those who don't know where Aurora is, I thought I'd show. There's Texas, obviously. That red dot, that is where we are standing right now. That's Aurora, Texas. So I thought I'd let people know so they can visualize in their head. Now in 1870 to 1890, that was Aurora's great boom time. They were doing really well. Some estimates say there was as many as 4,000 people living here. Business was thriving. There were blacksmiths and cotton gins. There were hotels, drugstores, and I bet it must have been pretty crazy on a Friday night, because there were 14 saloons at one point here, so it must have been very rowdy. If I could time travel, that must have been something. But then, Aurora's thriving, but then they had such a streak of bad luck. The cotton crop failed, the fire destroyed their downtown, many of the shops in their town square. The railroad just didn't even bother to come to Aurora, which was really bad, terrible. A lot of towns died because of that. But to top it off, they had this terrible epidemic. And I have bumped into the story of the Aurora epidemic while researching completely different things that happened in 1890. I've seen articles in New York papers about it. I've seen articles in 1890 papers that were from Washington State about it. Yes, of course, epidemics were more common at that time, but the one in Aurora was particularly bad. People were panic-stricken. Quite a number were just fleeing town. They were just leaving. The survivors, if you were lucky enough to survive this horrible disease, you might have been left blind, you might have been paralyzed or deaf. It was really awful. Meanwhile, Rome, as you drove here, you probably passed Rome. Rome even was upset. A lot of people wrote letters to the editor. They wanted to distinguish themselves from Aurora and say, hey, we don't even have a doctor here. We've only had 5 deaths in the past 6 years. And in fact, Rome didn't even have a graveyard at that time, just to contrast how horrible things were between these 2 towns right next to each other. So while I'm talking about it, I thought it was interesting to note that the life expectancy in 1897 was only about 40 years. So that was quite different. And naturally, people were very focused on health, infant mortality. I found this article, or when I was reading about the airship, they mentioned that 1 in 3 children would die before the age of 5. I double checked, and yes, the infant mortality rate in 1897 in the United States was 33%. It's now 0.2%. Which is great. But I love this. This is my favorite ad. I just had to throw this in here. It kind of reminds me of Monty Python with Terry Gilliam with that kid's face pasted on a pig. This is Grove's Chill Tonic, which I like. And they boast that it makes children as fat as pigs. I mean, these days we're worried about childhood obesity. Back then they were like, we gotta fatten this guy up. There's a lot of things mentioned, of course, about making childbirth easy, because many women still lost their lives through childbirth. This one claimed to make you stronger after you'd had your 1 of 10 kids, perhaps. Men, of course, they could just die of anything, so ads that claimed to help men tried to cover a lot of ground, like this one helps for pains in the back, pimples, unfitness to marry, and exhausting drains. So I don't know how that works. And there were a lot of electricity was fairly new. I mean, this was the high-tech thing. So it was the most common sense remedy known to cure disease. I can imagine how horrible it must have felt to wear this electric belt. I was got a little distracted by that. So back to Texas. I'm trying to figure out where to hold the mic so I don't peek it out. Maybe that's better. All right, back to Texas. In April and May of 1897, there were hundreds of airship sightings here. And I want to start with the hoaxes. Some of them were hoaxes. One of them happened over in Plano. These kids got a hold of a turkey. Why they chose a turkey, I really don't know. They tied a rope to its leg. They set fire to the rope, and then they tossed it in the air, hoping that this would cause a airship sighting. And in fact, all it really succeeded in doing was setting a building on fire. Well, whatever. Here's a high-tech hoax I had to include because I thought this was rather clever for the time, and nowadays we always accuse people of photoshopping things. Well, this person, he was an ex-cop, and he painted a picture of an airship, and then he held it up on a string, and he took a photo, and according to the article, a Kodak did the rest. And then his friends squealed on him, and his alleged, he claimed to have a photo of an airship. Well, he was debunked. I wanted to talk for a minute about hoax journalism. I wonder if I can move that arrow off the front of my stuff. There. Oh, okay, thanks. Hoax journalism. This is when a newspaper knowingly runs a story that is really not so true. It's more of a tall tale. It's meant to be entertaining, and if they pull a few legs along the way, they're fine with that. They just want to sell some papers. Some of the best writers you've ever heard of through history participated in hoax journalism, and you might say, why? Why would Ben Franklin, Mark Twain, and Edgar Allan Poe write phony stories? Sometimes they had lofty reasons for this. Sometimes they were trying to make some point, but most of the times it was simply because these paid well, and writers got to eat like everybody else. So in the 1800s, it was interesting. When I think of science fiction, I tend to think of the 60s as really being the birth of science fiction and when it became popular, but it was very popular in the 1800s through hoax journalism. A lot of these hoax journalist stories, they had a scientific, like a sci-fi flair to them. Oh, here's an example, the Great Moon Hoax of 1835. This was a fun one by the New York Sun, where they claimed that a British astronomer had, he had such a fancy telescope that he was able to see the beings that lived on the moon. And these beings included fire-wielding beavers, lunar bison, and flying man-bats. It's just such a great story. You can see why that would sell papers. Now this one is the Great Balloon Hoax of 1844. I thought I'd better include that one. And this is actually considered one of the top hoax journalist stories, the most popular ones of the 1800s. And it was, I guess, no wonder, because it was written by Edgar Allan Poe. He didn't use his real name, but he's such a good writer. You can imagine this one's very well written. And he claimed that a European balloonist had been up in his balloon and he got caught by a big gust of wind, and the gust of wind blew him all the way to America. So that sold a lot of papers, made a lot of money for Edgar Allan Poe. Even today, we have certain tabloids that kind of keep this fine tradition of hoax journalism alive. And, you know, you can pretty much tell when you're reading a hoax journalist story. I did, however, keep my eyes out as I was reading all these accounts for hoax journalism. And I did find a few stories. I trimmed this section down because one of the hallmarks of hoax journalist stories is they're very long-winded, convoluted. They're like little entertaining short stories, and they go on and on. Texas tall tales, if you can imagine. One of them I read about the airship claimed that it was piloted by aliens who landed at a Christian revival meeting, and they sang hymns with the people and ate barbecue. And, you know, these are usually overblown kind of stories like that, and they'd have pictures like I'm showing you here that are a little bit ridiculous but kind of fun. Which brings me to jokes. The airships were very much on people's mind, much in the way that if the Tonight Show had existed back then, you know that like Jimmy Fallon or Stephen Colbert, they would have been including jokes, little cracks about the airship in their nightly monologues. And there are a few of those. Here's a couple that I found. This one says, "The airship appeared again, this time in Paris, Texas. Poor brand of liquor they sell up there." Here's another. "Those who get the most satisfactory views of the airship are those who look through several glasses." And you can practically hear the rim shot after that. It's just like, oh, and these are like little one-liners that you would see. Here's one that I found in a police blotter I was reading, because I don't care what time period it is, police blotters are always good reading. This one, the person had stolen some incandescent globes, which are light bulbs essentially, and the reporter speculated that the thief is probably constructing an airship and needs the globes to string around its sides. So another little jokey reference there. This is pretty cool. The whole airship was on everybody's mind to the degree that it was incorporated in a political cartoon lampooning President McKinley. And so here is that at the top. I'll kind of break it down, but at the top you can see there is an airship in this political cartoon. In the middle, or at the bottom, there's a poem that has 3 stanzas, and one of them mentions the airship and says that it was in verity that agent of prosperity that travels in advance. And McKinley, when he ran for office, one of his slogans was that he was the advance agent of prosperity, which I guess was very catchy by those times. And they have a picture of McKinley off to the side, and it says below him, "McKinley, a practical joke." Then there's the airship itself, and I like on the balloon on the airship it says, "Airship propelled by high tariff campaign gas," so they're making fun of that. And then down below you have all the farmers. They're watching this advance agent that's supposed to be bringing them prosperity, and they've got their telescopes turned on it. So it was interesting. It was on people's minds to the extent that it made it into jokes and into political humor. I found a few cases of mistaken identity, and what intrigues me about these is I think it again shows how people were thinking so much about the airships. When you have something in the back of your mind and then something strange happens, and then the first conclusion you leap to is, maybe it's an airship. That was happening as well all over Texas, and I'd find little accounts of that. Here's one I found where people chased the airship. They were, what? We see something floating by, and they chased it down the street, and then when they finally caught up with it, it ended up just being a piece of wrapping paper. And I don't know, that one got me because I could see myself doing something like that, actually. Don't laugh. Well, you can laugh, okay. This other one, these guys were playing checkers. They were sitting in a lumber yard, they're outside playing checkers, and they heard a thump, and they just excitedly thought, wow, maybe the airship just landed nearby. And so they ran to investigate, only to discover that a pigeon had died in mid-flight. But they heard a thump. The airship was obviously on their mind. And that was the first little conclusion they jumped to. Now, many newspapers, they did not want to be associated with hoax journalism. They wanted to keep their reputations intact. So when they started reporting some of these sightings, and as I said, there were hundreds, they did so very carefully. And they made sure to mention that this sighting was reported to them by a reliable person. So there are a whole bunch of things that read, a reliable gentleman says he saw one. This airship was seen by several persons who are perfectly reliable in every way. Several other reliable persons, respectable gentlemen again, several truthful men. And this one was interesting. It said, no one's been very excited about these airship stories until this one guy reported one. And because he was a conscientious Christian gentleman who would not practice a deception for any purpose. That's the only reason they're reporting this story. They want you to know. So that was one style of article that I came across quite frequently. In case you're wondering what the airship ideas looked like, or what they were reporting over and over again, they would report a cigar-shaped object. Often they would say it was pointed on each end from the accounts that I read. A lot of times they mentioned a little basket of some sort beneath it. Here's another example. And then the other style, like I said, the cigar-shaped one is the most common one that I came across, but I did a close second, I guess, description would be one, they'd sometimes call it a flying bird and say that it had wings. And these sightings nearly always happened at night, from what I read. And the ship usually had a searchlight. Here's a map that shows the sightings in 1897. We're talking April and May of 1897. One thing that stood out for me is I also looked at a population map, and pretty much any place people were living, they were reporting airship sightings, which is a bit different than today, where it seems like when there's a high concentration of population density, there's not as many UFO sightings reported. So I didn't know what to make of that. I thought I'd point that out. Now, there's a whole bunch of what I just call straightforward sightings. And they were all over. I just picked kind of a smattering because I only have, less than an hour to talk. So, as I said, there's so many of these sightings, and they were all over Texas. Here's one in Weatherford at night, passing over the city. Here's one in Farmersville, and some thought it to be a cloudless tornado. This is an account where some people actually got into their storm shelters just to be sure. Ladonia says, the strange craft seen has thrown Texas into a whirl of excitement, and that's another nighttime sighting, as I was saying. Galveston, there were sightings there. They were all over Texas, so I kind of tried to pick a smattering for you. This one was seen at 3 in the morning by some undertakers, who, I like the description. They said, it moved eastward following the line of the beach as closely as one would do in driving a buggy. Here's another one. This was near Austin. 4 teenage boys were camping, and in the middle of the night, they were awoken by a strange craft that had a large searchlight that was as big as 4 ordinary arc lights. And it started to rain, so they told the reporter that they broke camp because of the rain, but the reporter adds that the mysterious light probably made the rain seem wetter than usual. Another witness says it was a grand sight, and while he did not think Judgment Day had come, yet he thought that thunder was to pay. Which brings me to the first of the theories that people had about what was going on. And these are theories that people had in 1897. So there were those who thought that perhaps the airships meant that Judgment Day was right around the corner. And with the turn of the century right around the corner. That often ignites that kind of thing or makes people think that the world's about to end. So here's a report from Deadwood. The semi-superstitious thought the airship had close connections with Judgment Day. Others hailed it as a special messenger sent in a divine and providential way. And McKinney, some thought Judgment Day at hand and momentarily expected to hear the sound of Gabriel's trumpet. More earnest prayers were sent up in 5 minutes than was ever heard in this place in a whole year. Yeah, that's interesting. Here's another one, Dallas, April 16th. Preachers say the airship is from the other world and is the avant courier of the second coming of Christ. And it goes on to say one of the reasons they believed this was that if it was an earthly device, it would be seen by day as well as night. So it's interesting that to some people in 1897, the fact that it was most often seen at night made it suspect. I just wanted to point out a few things about Judgment Day, how people felt in 1897. I've heard the townsfolk of Aurora, I've heard them criticized for how they behaved after the April 17th, 1897 crash that we are here to commemorate. They buried the burned inhabitant, the burned pilot that they found in the wreckage. They buried that body the next day. And I've heard them criticized for that. Why did they bury it? Why was there no autopsy? Why was it not sent to scientists? Things were different. There was no NCIS or CSI Aurora at the time. People's attitude towards their body was they wanted it intact. You didn't, in your buggy, you weren't an organ donor in case you died in a buggy accident and your corneas can be given to somebody. You wanted all your body parts. And I've been to cemeteries around here where you will see someone who had their arm amputated and they had that buried right beside them because they want all their pieces. So it was a little bit of a different idea and attitude that people had. And I just kind of wanted to stick up for the people of 1897 and just sort of defend their possible attitude at the time and say that to me it seems within reason and seems within their nature at the time. Another theory is that there was some connection between all these airship sightings and the tensions between America and Spain and Cuba. And of course, we went to war with Spain in 1898, so tensions were already starting. I found one article where they claimed that the airship was possibly en route to Cuba to scatter dynamite among Weyler's forces, Weyler being the Spanish general. Another one from Lano, rumor that the airship is a Spanish war scout, seemingly confirmed. So I didn't find this too often, but it was bandied about, mostly in editorials. There's a heavenly body theory that people had as well. People thought that since they were seeing it at night, maybe it was some sort of planet. This person, a professor, says the airship rumors are caused by the effect of the atmosphere on the star Alpha Orionis in the constellation Orion. So, when you're talking about the heavens, we might as well get to Mars. Some people think that Martians didn't come around until the 60s, but people were thinking about Martians in the late 1800s. The idea of humanoid creatures living on Mars, it was widely entertained. In fact, there was a book that came out in 1897 called The Martian by Georges du Maurier. And it's not really too sci-fi. It's actually a thinly veiled autobiography, and he calls a character in it the Martian. It just shows, though, that idea of a Martian, that was something of the day. And I just want to warn you, if you go to Amazon, don't confuse it with this. I saw several, when I went to download this, you can get it, I think, free or even 99 cents on Kindle. I saw a lot of one-star reviews who were saying, this has nothing to do with the movie that starred Matt Damon. So just, buyer beware, right? In 1877, the Italian astronomer Schiaparelli looked at Mars and he thought he saw canals on it, and he drew maps of them. This really seeped into the popular imagination, and people wondered if there were humanoids living on Mars. My favorite editorial that I found that was talking about the airship and was talking about Mars says, maybe on Mars they might even be inhabited by turkey-eating, novel-reading, opera-loving, cigarette-smoking mortals like human beings. So who knows, I was thinking about that in 1897. This is a little more fearful attitude. It is my opinion that the airship is a reconnoitering aerial war car from warlike Mars. Another person says, another solution offered is that the airship is an exploring party sent out by some other planet. So they're not really pointing their fingers to Mars exactly, but they are thinking about extraterrestrial ideas. Some of those were entertained in 1897. Of course, I have to mention the famous article or infamous article from the Dallas Morning News, which I'm sure you've been thinking about today, that mentions Mr. T.J. Weems, who gives it his opinion that the airship pilot who crashed here in Aurora was a native of the planet Mars. Another theory that I bumped into that I find quite compelling is the theory that there was a human inventor behind this whole incident. I'm just checking to make sure I don't go over time. Okay, I guess I gotta kind of speed up a little, sorry. Here's an article. They say the frequent occurrence of these visions almost convince one that there must be something to it. Can it be that some inventor has really accomplished the long dreamed of feat of navigating the air? That there really is such an invention now seems really beyond doubt, says another newspaper. And numerous reputable citizens have caught sight of it, giving unimpeachable testimony proving the fact. I like this one. The airship, they're saying it's a fitting triumph for our proud republic that this last great turn of the wheel of progress has been made by American genius. Speaking of American geniuses and American inventors, while this was going on from 1896 to 1897, people were pestering Thomas A. Edison. Every time he would step out, they'd be asking him, do you have anything to do with these airship sightings? You know, you're a genius, you're an inventor. Is this something you're doing secretly? And he had to publicly come out and denounce that he had anything to do with the airships a few times. One time he said, there are no known facts by which one could predict any commercial future for aerial navigation. I mean, he was an inventor, he wasn't a futurist, I guess. This is my favorite quote from him. He says, at best, airships could only be toys. So he really did not have much faith in where aerial navigation was going to lead. And people kept thinking he was behind it. Now, there were a lot of articles talking about inventor sightings, not just claiming to see the airship, but they claimed to have seen the inventors or the crew or to have interacted with them in some manner. These are quite interesting. One of them says, it talks about a farmer being woken at night by his dogs barking, so he grabs his rifle, runs outside, and within about 30 yards of the ship, he was met by an ordinary mortal who said, put down your gun, please, don't shoot me. And then the farmer says, well, what's your name? And the guy says, never mind about my name, call it Smith. And then he asks for some tools and lubricating oil. So you think, well, Mr. Smith, you know, that's a common alias, really shouldn't make much about it. But what I find, just one of those little niggling things, is that in February of 1896, the San Francisco paper reported that a Captain Charles A. Smith had recently patented a sheet metal double-tubed machine that looked like this. It was essentially an airship. They even call him the airship inventor. He was known to have patented it and invented quite a few things. So this was in February of 1896. It made the papers. The airship sightings started in the fall, and then they worked their way from the west. They made it to Texas for April and May. So I don't know, it was just interesting. And it's not the only time. There are plenty of other articles that mention interacting with someone who claimed his name was Smith. Another name that comes up a lot is Mr. Wilson, over and over again. So there's a little period of time in Uvalde. There's this one of the men who gave his name as Wilson. This other one, Beaumont, said he was Wilson. This one, Kuntz, they say his name was Wilson. There's another Wilson involved. Another thing that kept cropping up with these inventor sightings is that the inventors would say that they were in one of 5 ships. Not 4, not 3, not 6. It was just like, oh yeah, this is one of 5 ships when they would interact with the people. So, oh, that's my little alarm telling me I have to be wrapped up. Okay, I am. All right. And so this one says, Wilson, who also stated that his ship was only one of 5 that had been built in a quiet Iowa village. And that Iowa village comes up again and again. That's quite a lot of fun. Another one, a farmer, 5 ships, Iowa. Here, Deadwood again, 5 ships. And here's someone saying that perhaps the reason they have been citing so many different places is because there are so many ships. I also came across a few accounts talking about a big black dog. That was another thing that just came up enough for me to just make a little folder like the big black dog things. This person saw the airship go by. They saw 2 men in it and a big Newfoundland dog. So anyway, to sum up here, Texas airship fever, talking about April and May of 1897, and for 2 months, there was so much in the newspapers about hoaxes, jokes, actual airship sightings, inventor sightings, and all sorts of theories. It was very much on everyone's mind for that time period. And then, poof, just all of a sudden, you don't find anymore. You look for them and the sightings just ended. As this paper put it, the mysterious airship has disappeared so completely that people who were half inclined to believe it are beginning to think it was an out-of-date April Fool joke. This is May 13th. We were getting all these reports all the time. Everyone was thinking about it. It was all the rage. And then, poof. And to me, that is one of the most intriguing parts of this mystery, is why it was such a big thing and why it didn't just taper off. Why did it just end? I'll leave you with that. If you have questions or comments, come by my table. Or if you're one of the people watching online, you can email me, and my email is tuisnyder@gmail.com. And once again, thank you very much.